Okay, let's continue with the second presentation about a Middle East APT group. It's presented by Aseel Kayal from Check Point, and it's called The Big Bang Theory by APT C-23.
Cool. Just a second. Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Aseel, and today I want to present to you The Big Bang Theory by APT C-23. To introduce myself, I'm a malware analyst from Check Point. I've been in the InfoSec field for 2 years. My mother tongue is Arabic, so if you're doing any research that has to do with the Middle East, come talk to me after this. I'm very interested. And I'm also on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so feel free to follow, connect, or whatever. And just before we start, I'd like to give a brief introduction of the APT C-23, which is the name given to a threat group by Keyhoo 360 when they first discovered the first campaign of this threat group in early 2017. And this threat group uses both mobile and desktop attack vectors to target victims in the Middle East, but more specifically Palestinian victims. And they tailor the content of their applications to such an audience. And the different tools that were used by this threat group were given different names, such as Micropsia, Casper Agent, and the different campaigns were also called Frozen Cell, or even in some cases, Arid Viper. And my investigation of APT C-23 started when I came across this file called the Monthly Press Report, or translated into the Monthly Press Report. And when it is double-clicked, it opens up this document. And this document looks very legitimate for many reasons. First off, it uses the logo of the Political and National Guidance Committee, but also the logo of the State of Palestine. The original title of the document is His Supremacy Colonel Issam Abu Okal, which is actually the head of this committee, and we see him in this picture right here. Hello. And the news headlines in the press report are copied word by word from legitimate Palestinian websites. And those headlines or those reports were published on the 28th of March, which is actually a day before the timestamp in the document, the 29th of March. But despite all of this, there may be some warning signs for someone who has double-clicked the document, because even though its original name was the Monthly Press Report, the title says the Daily Press Report. And Microsoft Word shows us that the opened file is called 29th of March.doc and not the original file name we have seen. So let's go back to where it all began. The Monthly Press Report is, as a matter of fact, a self-extracting archive. And that means that when it is double-clicked, it extracts its contents and runs them. So we get the 29th of March doc, which we have just seen. And this is used as a decoy for the victim, to tell them all is good. You clicked a Word document. It's OK. But we also have a lovely executable running in the background called Driverinstaller U. And this is what we want to look into next. This is where the juicy stuff happens, because this is actually a malware written in C++. And to take a deeper dive into the code, the Driverinstaller U starts with some persistence attempts. It looks for the program data directory by using the get special folder path function. If it gets an error by calling this function, it displays the message, you'll need error handling here. And a simple Google search of this string shows us that this chunk of code was copied as is from Stack Overflow. The threat actor didn't even bother changing their handling message. Why should they? And once the program data directory is found, a subdirectory is created by the name Internet Assistant. And mind the typo in the word Internet, there is an additional E there. And this is important for later on. And the executable, of course, is copied into that directory, and a scheduled task is set to run this executable. Mutex is also created to prevent multiple instances of the malware to run on the same machine, and the mutex is also called Internet Assistant N. Great. Moving on to the CNC communication of the sample. The sample has an embedded CNC address, which it can contact over both port 80 and port 443. It has a Komodo certificate, so it can use HTTPS. And if for any reason the sample gets back an error from this communication attempt, whether the CNC is down or there was no internet connection at the time, the sample can use a backup CNC address, which is also hard-coded in the sample, and it sends a request to the following URL, which looks like it's base64 encoded. And if we decode this URL, we get devices/yet another base64 encoded string, and if we decode that twice, we get devices/requests. But the sample does communicate with the URL in its encoding, in its encoded form and not in the decoded one. And the threat actor could send back a new CNC address as a response, if they decide to change the infrastructure or if the main one is down, and that response is matched with a regular expression. If it is indeed a domain, then the server name is set to that new value. Unique identifier is created for each victim using their computer name, their username, and a random string. All are separated by an underscore, and this, of course, is used later on in all the requests that are sent to the CNC server from that specific victim. And the first request is used to register or to create that victim, so it is sent to the URL API serve create, along with 4 parameters. The first parameter is actually the name, which is the base64 encoded UID we have just seen. The second parameter is the operating system version. The third parameter is supposed to be the malware name or the app name. And if you remember, the executable was called Driverinstaller U, but in this case, the app name is Internet Assistant. That's the one that is sent. And the last parameter is, of course, AV, any installed antivirus vendors. Cool. So when the victim is successfully registered, the malware would start generating post requests to API serve requests along with the victim ID every minute. And if something else besides the victim ID is sent, the CNC replies with a weird error message, sorry, not found this device. But if the ID is correct and all is good, then it will respond with an interesting JSON array. And we have in the JSON array elements that are marked as true or false. And as a matter of fact, the malware itself divides its functionality into so-called modules. Each module is in charge of a specific task or for exfiltrating a certain kind of data from the victim's machine. And you can see that they have weird names like Penny or Kuthrapali. And the first module is run file, and there is no plot twist, it runs a file. But there are 6 other modules that are named after characters and actors from the Big Bang series, from the TV show. And this is basically the reason why we decided to call this campaign the Big Bang Theory attack. And they are in charge of some tasks such as, deleting the payload for a touch of stealth, to self-destruct. They could send a list of running processes to the threat actor using the WHOIS module, and then the threat actor could decide to terminate a process. If you're running Wireshark, for example, they could terminate that using the Hofstadter module. And in the example we have seen, the only module that was marked as true was Penny. And in that case, the malware code checks the element's name. If it is Penny, it checks if it's marked as true. And if it is true, a file is uploaded to API serve request /ID/Penny, which in this case, the file is a screenshot taken from our malware lab. And one cool thing about those modules is that some of them have comments or remarks that were probably there for debugging purposes by the threat actor, and they were left in the code. And those comments are base64 encoded, and if we decode them, we also get some weird things like my prog is exit or download file text, and so on and so forth. And these were interesting, and we were able to find we were able to get to new findings using those documents and using those comments, and we will look into that in a bit. And in addition to the actors from the TV series The Big Bang Theory, there were also 3 modules named after actors from a Turkish TV series called Dirilis Ertugrul. And those modules show some of the espionage attempts of the malware sample because they're able to download an executable from a remote service, and they can change that executable's extension from txt to exe. And they could send back a list of documents or partitions to the threat actor. And we can see that unlike, your usual rats that are after the credentials or browser history or try to keylog the victim, this one is interested in kind of building a profile of the victim and seeing what's going on in their machine. And we see that they are interested in files with specific extensions such as doc, XLS, PDF, or CSV. And the document that we started with, if you remember it, the press report, it could have actually belonged to a victim that was infected by a sample of this malware, and this document could have been stolen and used in future generations of this attack. That's interesting to keep in mind. And apart from the TV stars, there are also the last 3 modules are apparently in Turkish, and we don't really know what those modules do. And the reason for that is because we only got them back as a response from the CNC server in the JSON array, and they were always marked as false. And even if we tried to tamper the HTTPS response and mark them as true, we can't really get the malware to handle them. So what this could indicate is that this sample is still being developed and that there may be other samples in the future with more capabilities, and they will be able to do more damage in the victim's machine and get more data out of it. Cool. So as an overview of the malware, we have seen its persistence attempt. We've seen the fact that it uses a backup CNC address and that it fingerprints the victims using their own information. It has multiple functionalities that are divided into modules, and it can send different commands to get different kinds of data. It is likely a part of a multi-stage attack, and we know this because it is capable of downloading another executable from a different server. So we're most probably looking at the first stage only and not at the full infection chain. And we couldn't get the sample to send us anything interesting in our malware labs. We tried, we let it run for 2 whole days. There were no interesting commands that were sent back from the CNC. The only thing that they did was send a command to take a screenshot from our machine, but nothing else. So it seems to be after specific victims, and it does so by looking at the screenshots, by looking at the list of documents that they have, and only then will they proceed to send them more malicious stuff. And we wanted to know, we realized this is something that is interesting, and we wanted to see if there are more files like this one out there, or if we're looking at something that is unique, or if someone has already researched this before. And then we decided to use some of the unique identifiers that we have seen in our own sample. So if you remember the name Internet Assistant with the typo, we used that and we were able to find 1 additional executable in the wild that uses that name. And using the base64 encoded comments and also some unique strings from the sample itself, we were able to build Yara rules, and those got us back an additional executable called WinGraphicDriver. And it basically had the same functionality as our sample. The only difference was that instead of the TV actor names, it only used names of BMW cars for some reason. But that wasn't enough for us. We were able to find 2 samples, great, but we wanted to know more about this. And so we turned to the CNC addresses and tried to find out more about this infrastructure. And unlike your typical CNC, where if you access it through a browser, it doesn't show you anything, it sends back a 404, or doesn't show you any response, these ones show ready-made, the ones that appeared in the samples, show ready-made bootstrap templates when they are accessed through a browser. And there were some changes that were made to the bootstrap template. Some of the default strings were changed into things like probably the most music site in the world, or contact@something.com. And those strings, again, they repeat the English that we have seen in the comments before with the grammatical mistakes and whatever. But they also enabled us to look them up in different search engines and find websites with the exact same structure and the same content that could have been used for future samples. So we were able to get, I think, 4 or 5 additional domains using just looking up those strings. But that wasn't enough for us. And we wanted to relate this perhaps to a bigger campaign or see if it has been going on for a while. And this is when we came across this report by Cisco's TELUS. And they researched a malware written in Delphi that was used to target Palestinians. And some of the characteristics of this malware were very similar to the one that we had. For example, the use of decoy documents, but also the references to TV shows. They used the same format with the JSON arrays, elements marked as true or false, and even one of the CNC websites was called sheldoncooper.info. So we knew that this was related to our sample, and using this, we were able to get to more reports by different security vendors who have done an amazing job, by the way, in covering the different aspects and the different campaigns by this threat group. And some of the vendors only looked at the mobile aspects or the desktop aspects of this attack. Not all of them attributed this attack to APT C-23. And we realized that we were looking at an evolving malware. It's something that constantly changes. Our YARA rules were only able to detect recent files that almost looked more or less the same as ours, but they weren't able to detect any of the old ones. And there were more than 200 domains in total used as CNCs from all of those researches. And that's when I realized I really needed some help in connecting the dots and kind of looking over this massive amount of data that all of the vendors found. And that's when I decided to literally connect the dot and create this mapping of APT C-23 and just gather all the information that the vendors were able to find. So what this mapping shows is the campaign researched by the different vendors, the CNC servers that they managed to find, the TV show references that those CNC servers make. And there were some cool connections because we were able to see, for example, a CNC that was discovered by 2 different vendors in 2 different generations of this campaign, or it was used as a CNC server for both an application and an executable. And there were some interesting connections that we were able to see. And when I started adding those domains, I was dealing with massive amounts of them, and then I thought to myself, there is no way in hell someone that has been launching this attack and using both applications and executable didn't slip up at some point and didn't give away something that could help us find out anything about their true identity or kind of just get an idea of what their incentive is behind this attack. And then I realized that in the first reports that covered this campaign or this threat group by Palo Alto Networks and Kihu 360, they mentioned that some of the domains that were registered back in 2016 used the name Adam Swift in their WHOIS information. And there were approximately 30 domains that used this name, and the reports didn't mention much else about this Adam Swift. So I decided to give it a closer look and see if I can get any interesting details out of the WHOIS information. And there were some interesting details. The email address that was used, Adam Swift 2016, correlates with the year that those domains were registered in, 2016. The street name that was provided in the WHOIS information is a real street in Gaza, with many businesses registered there. The postal code 972 is the country code for the West Bank or for Israel. And the phone number, even though it starts with 63, which is the Vietnamese country code, I think, if you omit that, you get a number that starts with 059. And a number that starts with 059 matches the ones given by the Palestinian mobile carrier WHOIS. And this was confirmed by the WHOIS information of the first domain that was registered under Adam Swift, because it showed this number with 970 country code, which is the Gaza country code. And obviously I try to look up this number. It has no WhatsApp or Telegram accounts. I haven't tried to call it yet, I don't know what I would do if the threat actor picks up. But it's interesting, the use of this information, the use of a Palestinian mobile number and a Palestinian street address. So it's possible, again, that the threat actor is using information that they are familiar with, information from their surroundings. And newer websites that were used in campaigns in 2018 didn't give away that much information. A lot of them didn't have any relevant WHOIS, but some of them were registered using Palestinian web hosting companies. And those companies are also located in Gaza. And this is not to say, that they're related to this operation or that they're in charge of it. They seem to be very legitimate businesses. But the choice of these companies is interesting because this can also help us pinpoint kind of the whereabouts of the threat actor and know that they are using services in their surroundings, services that they know. And the first one of these, for example, the Atyaf company, is if we look at their Facebook page, actually, we see that they are located in Al-Jala Street, which we have seen in the WHOIS information used by Adam Swift. And if we look at their description, we can see that they do things like mobile app development, web design, and web hosting. And they look like, again, they have many customers. They show some of their products, the applications and the websites they have worked on. And they don't seem to be related to this, but they could provide a perfect environment for someone who is launching an attack with both mobile and desktop attack vectors to come from. This was all an attempt for me to kind of build the profile of the threat actor, of whoever is behind this, and try to find out more about them. And more recently, I came across something that someone published on Pastebin. And they have been looking into this threat group as well, but more specifically into the mobile aspect. They're called Robin Hood Elite. No idea who they are. And they were looking into the mobile applications. They even released a tool to help victims get rid of the malicious applications and remove them from their device. But in addition, they were also able to gain access to the CNC server used by the malicious application that they found. And they released some of the images found on that CNC server. And a lot of those images were, pictures taken by victims and then stolen by the threat actors, selfies and whatnot. But some of the images were screenshots. And some of those screenshots were taken from the threat actor's developing environment when they were actually working on the code. And I decided to, again, look at the screenshots and see if they can tell me something that I don't already know about the threat actor and see if I can get more information out of them. And the screenshots show that 2 screens are being used, so we already know we're dealing with a professional. And the first screen showed a Visual Studio developing environment, and we see code being written in C++ in the background, and the JSON array that we're already familiar with, with weird names marked as true or false, probably, or, we know that one of the ones marked as true is in charge of the screenshot taking functionality, so this is why we ended up with the screenshot. And we see that the logged in user to this Visual Studio is someone called Noora Sham. And the other screen also showed a panel or a dashboard for keeping track of victims. And the logged in user to the dashboard is called Osama. We don't know much else about this person from the dashboard. The available information that we see here, the IP address and whatever, that all belongs to a Palestinian victim. But we do see, tabs open in Arabic. We see bookmarks about C++ issues. And at the bottom, we see a resource hacker and tools like PyCharm and so on and so forth. And another screenshot from the threat actor's development environment showed an open Facebook tab. And naturally, when I saw this, I created a fake Facebook profile and started looking for anyone called Noora and try to see if their profile picture matches this tiny icon that we see here. I tried to enroll in all of the groups that we see and look through their member lists for someone with this name and this picture. I stalked all of the people that they talked with and looked through their friend lists and groups and likes and pages. I looked through this page for someone called Lara who liked it, and through that tried to find someone called Noora. I looked for pages that have same icons that match the ones that we see on the screen, and I even looked at this URL we see in this picture, to no avail. I couldn't find this Facebook profile. I believe it has been deactivated since. You see that the timestamp or the date at the bottom shows that this screenshot was taken in January. They could have removed the profile, changed the name, or changed the picture. I don't know. I would love to be proven wrong, but it seems to have been deactivated. And that's when I decided to look for the name we have seen in Visual Studio, Noora Sham, in Google. And it resulted in this picture, which did look like the tiny icon that we have just seen in Facebook. And this picture came from a Twitter account, also under the name Noora Sham. And looking at this Twitter account, we see that they are interested in news about information security. They follow, hybrid analysis, malware hunter team, mobile security. And if we look at their tweets, we also see that the first one was Hello World. And they like some things about PHP and web development. So we do seem to be looking at a Twitter avatar that belongs to the threat actor behind APT C-23. And this account is still active, by the way. But I wasn't able to get anything else out of this or kind of find out more about the person behind this or their true identity. It's just interesting to note. But in conclusion, we're looking at an ongoing attack. Even after we published our own research into the Big Bang campaign, other vendors also found newer samples and published their insights to them as well. They're still going and releasing more applications and executables. Even though the code is a bit hard to keep track of, we see that they follow the same characteristics. The signature move of this threat group seems to be referencing TV shows, whether in the domains or in the JSON array or the URLs. So that's something that could easily identify a malware that's being spread by this threat group. We've seen its espionage attempts and the fact that it's not after financial gain. It looks for the documents and tries to identify the victim before moving on to the next stage. And it seems like we're looking at a Palestinian threat actor that uses their knowledge of the Palestinian world and the Palestinian people and uses that against them, basically. They know what kind of applications they're likely to download, they know what kind of documents they're likely to be looking at, and so they weaponize those documents and those applications against them. Thank you.
Okay.